Let's take a look at this video from Maximus Aviation.
I admire and respect airline pilots, I really do. Hell, I created an entire YouTube channel in their honor. But I have a heartfelt message to my commercial pilot friends, and believe this with all due respect when I say, the cockpit of the airplane you fly is not your personal fortress of solitude or your safe space. It's your office. It's where you go to work.
I don't know what he thinks we're doing up there, but this opening already sets an extremely disrespectful tone towards a group of professionals dedicated to safety, but let's see where he goes with it.
The cockpit is no different than the patrol car a law enforcement officer uses or the cubicle at any office where ordinary people do their jobs. Yes, I know you get all the perks and the honeys and the stylish tapered uniforms with the tight bicep-hugging medium shirts, and we're all envious of your lifestyles and wish we could be you. However, like it or not, in this day and age, the rest of the human race is being filmed 24/7 at their jobs and offices. From Wall Street to Walmart. And I understand sometimes you're afraid of people seeing you possibly at a moment of weakness. But consider this. Policemen have died live on camera and have also killed live on camera as the world watches on their iPhones and computers because YouTube has thousands of money-making channels dedicated to just that. Firefighters wear body cams. City buses, commuter trains, subways, and even Uber cars, and so many more. We're all filmed at work and on the street. Yes, your job is important, and yes, it is a life and death job at times, but also as law enforcement.
The argument so far seems to be hinging on, well, everybody else gets filmed all the time, so you can't complain. So who's to say that this level of surveillance is not already at an unacceptable point? That's like saying to a serial killer, well, you've already done 10 murders, you might as well just do 1 or 2 more if you're going to get away with it.
And you know what an even deadlier occupation than yours is? Working at a convenience store, where even the 7-Eleven has dozens of cameras pointed at the clerk at any given time. It's life in the 21st century, like it or not.
Your convenience store analogy doesn't hold up. Any unvetted, unchecked member of the public with any number of intentions can enter a convenience store and commit a crime. The camera is there to attempt to ascertain their identity. The same if multiple cashiers work in the store and one has a hand in the till. We can work out who's responsible. We already know the identity of the people in the flight deck, which remains locked off from the public, so adding a camera for this purpose is pointless.
So if you need more privacy than the rest of the professions on Earth, well then that seems to be a puzzle to me. But like I said, I would love to be an airline pilot. But it's time to stop hiding behind the union curtain and catch up with the times. It's not 1954 anymore. It's 2024. And it's a big, scary, unfair, ugly world out there, and none of us likes it. But that's just the way it is. So yes, it's time to add video along with audio in the cockpit. Not just for our safety, but for yours.
That's next on Maximus.
Well, this year's FAA Reauthorization Bill made its way through the U.S. Congress as once again the 20-year-old debate over cockpit video recorders has been raised once more. Yet, year after year, the Airline Pilots Union lobbyists, along with the Teamsters Union, who represent largely the cargo sector with a few commercial carriers leading the charge, are paying off every politician they can, allegedly, to put the brakes on the whole video in the cockpit idea. It is mind-boggling that the idea of a safer cockpit is such a sore subject for pilots, because when an aircraft has a safety issue, they are the first to complain and demand change, which they absolutely should, by the way.
The reason you're finding this mind-boggling is because you're starting with the assumption that the camera would increase safety. As you say, pilots are the first to shout when there's a safety issue in the industry. Safety is ingrained in us from day one of flight school, and pilots are selected primarily based on their attitude to safety-related matters, amongst other things. If pilots are telling you that installing cameras are adding nothing and possibly detrimental to safety, you should be listening.
And for 20 years, the NTSB has been begging the U.S. government and the FAA to implement the technology, insisting that it could help with accident investigations and prevent those same kinds of accidents from happening in the future. Sounds pretty sensible, right? Well, not if you ask a pilot. because pilots maintain that video surveillance is an unnecessary invasion of privacy that could affect their job performance. Seriously, invasion of your privacy. I said it earlier, from police to firefighters all the way down to Uber drivers and 7-Eleven clerks. They all perform their jobs just fine under the watchful eye of technology. So what exactly is going on in a cockpit that is so secret that can't be filmed? The NTSB first proposed cockpit video monitoring all the way back in 1989 after investigating an incident at Kansas City, and there have been other incidents since where, especially in missed approaches and go-arounds, pilots have tended to remain in the air much longer than needed simply to allow the 1-hour tape to run out, thus losing compromising data in the process.
Can you provide an example of your claim where a crew has remained in the air after a go-around to overwrite the cockpit voice recorder? The cockpit voice recorder is not generally the first place to look when you want to know what happened in a non-normal situation. The aircraft is constantly monitoring and recording hundreds of parameters and the movement and position of every flight control input, every switch and every lever, to the point where the flight is able to be replayed after the event.
200.
Yes, the aircraft retains and transmits this data every time. If the stable approach criteria are busted, this information is reported by the aircraft after landing. Staying in the air for an hour would not stop this from happening.
Following that investigation, the NTSB called for longer playing CBRs, which can record cockpit sounds for as long as 2 hours, along with flight deck video recorders. At the time, airlines had a valid point since the equipment needed to capture and store video footage was much bigger and heavier and more expensive than it is today. So the NTSB's proposal was quickly dismissed as technically and economically infeasible. However, with recent advances in video technology, that argument has become obsolete. Cameras and data storage devices have gotten smaller, lighter, and more affordable. And today, decades later, it's mandatory that cockpit voice recorders now store at least 2 hours of data. But now it remains to be seen if and when the FAA will actually implement the new 25-hour data and voice recorder rule. Like I said, I have my doubts. However, the Airline Pilots Association is strongly opposed to cockpit video. And because the pilots union holds significant lobbying power in Congress, well, Congress continues to just look the other way, as long as the cash keeps flowing into the right pockets, that is. Still, the union keeps rehashing its decades-old statement claiming that video footage would add virtually nothing of real value to the investigative process, and could, due to its subjective nature, lead investigators down the wrong path. They argue that digital flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders already provide sufficient information for accident investigation, and that those devices are far more useful than cameras.
Let's take a look at an accident case study. Air France 447 experienced an icing event leading to an unreliable airspeed situation. This was not correctly diagnosed and dealt with, leading to what should have been identified as a stall by the flight crew, requiring a reduction of angle of attack, putting the nose down in this case. We know from the voice recordings and data parameters captured the exact actions of the crew. Here is the stick position. We can see that the right seat pilot is commanding a nose-up pitch almost the entire time the aircraft is in a stall. The exact cause of the crash has been completely determined by the data and conversation heard. How would staring at the back of a pilot's shirt in the dark have added anything at all when we already have everything we need to completely reconstruct the events? Here's another example, the Colgan air crash. We can replay the entire approach leading up to the accident. We can see the cause of the crash as the captain, who was the pilot flying, neglected to increase power when the autopilot leveled the aircraft off, leading to a stall and inappropriate response on the flight controls. We can also see that the flaps were raised, making the situation worse. Again, filming the pilot's back would not have gleaned any additional information, and it would not have prevented this accident. There's simply no safety case to add cameras.
The union also expresses concerns about pilot privacy and data security. However, to counter that, many countries have laws that restrict access to cockpit voice recordings, although sometimes transcripts are released during investigations and tapes used as evidence in court proceedings, and they can become a matter of public record. But the union says because of that, lawyers will use videos to be an irresistible gimmick to increase damage claims for pain and suffering and alleged negligence. Oh, so if you screw up and kill people, you don't want to be held responsible. Okay, look, in closing, to sum up, and this is just my personal opinion, but let's say the quiet part out loud. None of this is about cameras in the cockpit. You all watch the same video as I do, and there are thousands of airliners that have videos showing entire flights from prep to shutdown. So we know it's easy and it can be done. What it comes down to is just a union pissing contest over the fact that pilots and their unions just don't want cameras watching them while they work. Full stop. And because Congress and the FAA will always have their back, they aren't worried that they will have to deal with cockpit cameras anytime soon. So it's good news, bad news. It looks like finally the US is leaping into the modern age and finally going to allow 25 hours of cockpit recording instead of just 2 hours. But the bad news is pilots still don't want to be subject to the same rules the rest of us live under, and once again grease the right wheels to get Congress and the FAA to look the other way. So there will be no video in the cockpit anytime soon. And if you ask me, I think not only is it tragic, but it's just plain stupid.
The only thing a camera can add is an additional level of intrusion and the feeling of being watched and judged, which alters the actions of humans. This may delay critical decisions through fear of being filmed and watched. At present, we're monitored without any real visual reminder, and it's easy to put it to the back of your mind. Pointing cameras at people amends their behavior. Depending on the situation, it may be for better or worse. However, given that we are the most monitored and checked group of professionals, and aviation is one of the safest industries in the world, I would recommend that you listen to the qualified people telling you that a camera in the cockpit is a terrible idea, and not display the arrogance of thinking that because you make YouTube videos on aviation topics, that you know any better.